background engineering, past 18 years. I've taken the challenge of working in cybersecurity now. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm actually going to go through your all's bios by myself just because we can do it a lot faster that way. So Ling is the head of cyber strategy and capabilities development in the cybercrime directorate of the International Criminal Police Organization, Interpol. She's based in Singapore. Laura Temesi, on my right, is currently the head cyber partnerships and communications at Standard Chartered Bank. She's based in Kenya and has held various leadership roles within the banking industry. She's passionate about cyber risk management, innovation, and information risk data privacy. Akshay Joshi, thank you so much for hosting, is the head of industry and partnerships for the World Economic Forum Center for Cybersecurity, working in Switzerland, driving collaborative action to strengthen cyber resilience across industry ecosystems. And then there's me. My name is Komal Bazaz. I'm the Chief Business Officer at the Global Cyber Alliance, but I come with 20 years of international development experience. So I'm excited to see these two worlds collide. So let's move into the focus of the discussion as quickly as we can. At the end of the day, there's so much going on in the cybercrime policy and cybercrime activity space. And one of the things that we're really starting to see, again, going back to that theme of, is this something completely and utterly new? Is it putting attackers at the positive side and defenders at the bottom side? What is actually happening in this space? And I think that's something that we really want to kind of get into. So Stefan, I wondered if you could please answer a couple of quick questions on this front. And I apologize for my pages that are moving around. Okay. I understand you and your country have spent a significant amount of time and energy over the last couple of years to better protect Ghanaians. Obviously from your own work and also from Dr. Albert's work, it's been quite a big proactive step. Can you describe what you found to be some of the most effective critical elements of what you've been doing to help protect Ghanaians in this space?
Great. Thank you for your question. I think what I would want to highlight is around capacity building for the public. And the basis is the fact that back in 2018, there was a survey with the Oxford University together with the World Bank that tried to assess the ecosystem of Ghana in terms of cybersecurity maturity. So out of that, we came out with a strategy around awareness creation, targeting children, the public, government, and businesses. So one of the building blocks we've used is what we call a point of contact. So basically giving the public a way to report incidents to us, and by voice, SMS, WhatsApp, we gather a lot of data, and then we then craft that into public alerts that go out every month. Now, what would then happen also is once you release those alerts, you have the media engaging. So you are able to go to the radio stations, television stations, expand the information that you've let out there, do it in local language, do it in English, and then you're actually building capacity. The analytics from there also is what helps us to now shape policy, shape what we do as an authority. And in terms of statistics, since we've been running that POC for nearly 4 years and over 44,000 calls have come in. And we find that about 9% are actual incidents, but the remainder are actually people just asking you questions. Can I do this or not? Is this safe or not? So we find that as a key thing. What we've also complemented that with is working with the schools, the children. So we go to the high schools, we set out education programs, and we've touched well over 90,000 children over the period. Just this year, we are approaching 90,000 in terms of engagements. And we've enhanced that with what we call the National Cyber Challenge. So it's a quiz program for the high schoolers. After you've done the training, you organize a quiz, make it competitive. So now you are building interest in cybersecurity at the same time, educating them. So I'd say those are the interesting things we've homed in on as an authority.
That is fantastic. I love those kinds of ideas of programs. And I mean, I was expecting you to really talk much more on the cyber crime side, and actually going back to the theme from earlier today, really thinking about the people. It's all about behavior change and capacity building. So thank you for that. Do you have a sense, what do you think are the biggest policy gaps in the area of cybercrime? Do you think there's any best ways or venues that we can address those pieces?
I think the key thing, or one of the things I can talk about, has to do with international cooperation. Now we all accept and understand that cybersecurity is borderless, essentially. something hitting us in Ghana could be originating from somewhere in Asia or America. And your ability to counter it or to respond to it is based on whether you have relationships with similar authorities there. If CSA is seeing an incident here and can't talk to the person in that country, then it's going to be difficult to counter it. So I see that as an area we can improve. There are organizations like the FIRST, Forum for Incident Response and Security Teams, that offer the national sets of various countries a forum for engaging. And therefore, for countries that don't yet have sets, those are one of the things you can actually build on. Create a set, hook it into that system, and then you have a way to exchange information, exchange learnings. You have organizations like Council of Europe, GFC. Those are all avenues for information sharing and collaborating on the international stage. So I think for the continent, that's an area we can improve on.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Pei-Ling, I wonder if I could turn it to you. The cyber landscape has obviously shifted dramatically over the last 10, 15 years. And I wondered if I could direct the question around what you think the most pressing near-term threats are from a cybercrime perspective.
All right. Maybe let me first start by talking about AI. I know this maybe might sound like, okay, tell me something that I don't know, because everyone is talking about AI, with the rise of generative AI, large language models, ChatGPT. I think no one here doesn't know what ChatGPT is. But aside from looking at further advancements and developments of this technology, we need to look at their possible downsides. So first things first, I think several countries are reporting the use of AI in cybercrime as an emerging concern. Of note, some examples include using AI chatbots in the perpetration of online fraud. So cybercriminals may use such chatbots, whose the way they converse with the victims are now, closely resembling how, normal humans will interact over a chatbot application. And this can be used by criminals to either gather personal information or even spread malware or ransomware. Other possible downsides of AI that would be of concern where cybercrime is related may be the fact that cybercriminals may automate cyber attacks with the use of artificial intelligence. Like, for example, we might see more and more cybercrimes being conducted using AI. Like, for example, in the near term, we might see DDoS attacks moving from botnets to the use of AI to generate larger scale and severity type of attacks. I think information leaks could be one concern by using AI, because ChatGPT has proved to be such a useful application whereby people can search for, what your itinerary should be for a 3-day work trip to Ghana. Or, we may see software developers, trying to refine their codes by, bouncing ideas with ChatGPT, which may be dangerous because they might inadvertently, reveal company or organizational information into these large language models. So information leaks through such AI technologies might be a risk. Of course, I can go on and on about AI, but I think I'm going to just leave it as that. Other immediate challenges, again, I'm going to mention, crypto. Okay, again, tell me something that I don't know. So the advancement of crypto has brought about new operating models for cyber criminals. So some that are of note are like mixers, coin swapping services, decentralized exchanges, peer-to-peer cryptocurrency exchanges. So all these makes it very hard for us to trace the source of all these illicit funds. And sometimes all these different methods are used on top of each other, so it makes it very, very challenging to deal with all these cyber threats. So I think in the shortage of time, I'm going to just leave it to these two main areas, but happy to address other specific issues that we might see.
Thank you. And I wonder, I think people do have a general sense that these are emerging threats, especially as cybercriminals are using them more and more. Do you have a sense, and have you seen any kind of experiences or examples of things that we can do to leverage AI from the defender's point of view? And what are the things that we can be using?
So AI definitely has good application. Earlier, I mentioned about the possible risk of software developers using AI and large language models to refine their coding. So if AI is leveraged properly, it will definitely help us, for example, in case management, because many countries, many organizations are facing a larger scale type of attacks, larger numbers of attacks. So I think AI can also be used to better manage information within the organization to help us perform more efficient sense making. But of course, the deployment of the AI technologies within organizations, within national agencies, that's something that need to be managed and calibrated properly to prevent the risk of information leaks, like what I mentioned earlier. So I believe, and we, Interpol as an organization, believe that these emerging technologies are areas that may pose risk and impact to law enforcement because it makes it harder for us to obtain evidence. It makes it harder for us to trace the criminals and their illicit proceeds of crime. It makes it harder for investigation and prosecution. But it also provides us with opportunities to make use of these technologies to manage our work, to increase our capacity in dealing with, the multiple cases that we may have to deal with. But it is really a matter of how we carefully calibrate how we use these technologies.
Appreciate that. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit more about the role of the private sector in cybercrime. So Laura, in your opinion, in your estimation, what can the ideal role of private sector be in combating cybercrime? What are the kinds of things that we should be looking at for private sector to be doing?
Yeah, thank you. That's an excellent question. And even before I get into it, the one thing that we need to appreciate, all of us in this room, is that cybersecurity management and cybercrime management is a team sport. So I cannot say that I want to do it alone without working with the government agencies, civil society, and the community at large. So now linked to that, then we must appreciate that the technical know-how will often sit within the private sector, meaning that a lot of the tools that are used to combat cybercrime, to detect, to trace, are developed by private firms. So how can they build it in a way that makes it possible to cooperate better with government, with law enforcement agencies, with civil society, with academia? Yeah. Then the other role I'd talk about is the role in making sure that whatever it is that's being built and innovated is being done in a safe manner. When you talk about Gen I, which you've talked about, and even quantum computing, there's no public entity that is developing Gen I technology. It's all being done by the private sector. When you look at social media, which is a place where some of these crimes are being committed, particularly online violence and bullying, Facebook, Instagram, none of this is owned by the public sector. It's a private sector. So they have a crucial role to play in terms of information sharing. But even at the point of development, they need to build in a way where they also appreciate that while I have the commercial intention that it's used for good, I need to think about the users of the system. How can a cybercriminal abuse it and use it for bad? A good example is AI and the deep fakes. I bet by the time it was being developed, nobody thought that somebody would be able to put your face and get you saying things that you shouldn't be saying and drive disinformation, which can have serious consequences, particularly if it has a political angle to it, for example. So just understanding that with that risk in place, as a private sector entity, how do I develop it in a way where I'm also thinking not just about mitigating against this risk, but carrying everyone along, carrying the public sector, carrying law enforcement, allowing them to understand that when I'm developing this, this is what you need to look out for to be able to carry out your mandate. Yeah? Then I think important to appreciate as a private sector, we'll always scratch our heads and talk about regulating, whether to regulate, is regulation holding back innovation? But it's important to understand that the team in whose hands this technology is in terms of development is actually the private sector. So they have a crucial role to play in terms of influencing regulation and policy and driving advocacy, rather than coming on later on and complaining that the regulation or the conversations around policy are stifling innovation. So why don't we stand up to be counted and play our role in society? Because the reason why we exist as a private sector is because we've been given the power by the consumers of our technology to continue to be profitable. So that's what I can say.
I love that.
Thank you.
I wonder if I could follow up with one question on that front, because, I mean, that is the ideal role of the private sector. Have you seen an interesting example of one organization or somebody that has done that in a really interesting way that can be used as an example? Because usually a lot of times you'll need a regulation or some kind of teeth to be able to incentivize the private sector to act a certain way. But if you've seen it where private sector has acted upon their own accord in this very ideal manner, I would love to hear it.
I think the one that we would probably all be aware of is, I think, X, Twitter, and also Facebook. We'll appreciate that online abuse of children and online sexual violence against children is globally recognized as a crime, and every country does all it can to protect children. So that's one area where I can say cooperation has worked very well. And that is why when you check on X and you report something that it's abusing children, it is likely that that post is going to be reviewed and brought down. So that's an area where there is cooperation. It's not foreign to all of us what's been happening with the war right now, Gaza. When you post images that are not appropriate, at some point those images are going to be brought down, because perhaps there's an intention behind it to protect the dignity of the children or those that are impacted, or even those that are experiencing difficulties in that situation. So that's an area where it's worked. I can say the ongoing discussion right now on AI, if you look at who are taking part in a lot of the policy discussions with governments, and the recent conference that took place, I think in the UK, you'll see there was a lot of private sector involved there. So there's something being done there. It doesn't mean that there's nothing being done or that we've done enough. More needs to be done. And it needs to be intentional and needs to transcend beyond the profitability agenda.
I hope so, for all of our sakes. Thank you. I'm going to, again, kind of switch gears, and it links to something that, Laura, you were talking about, but obviously the private sector has a role to play, but you also mentioned that it can't just be the private sector alone. It has to include, the public sector, civil society, et cetera. Akshay, you've done a lot of work in the public-private space. I wondered if, in your experience, if you could talk a little bit about, what does it really mean when we say meaningful multilateral collaboration? We use these words all the time, but what does it actually look like in an example of some sort?
Thank you for that, Komal. So I'm going to flip it a little bit. Whenever we talk about partnerships, we're always talking about the good guys coming together and forging partnerships to go against the people who are supposedly after some of the data we hold, or holding us to ransom or the likes. But let's actually take a step back, right? The nature of cyberspace is such that it lends itself extremely favorable for cybercriminals. There are three key reasons for that. One, the entry barrier is particularly low. For as low as about $10, you can buy basic exploits. For a few hundreds, maybe more sophisticated ones. The second, and an area where we work very closely with our colleagues from Interpol as well, the risk of prosecution is low as well because of jurisdiction-related issues. And that's a problem that they are working very hard to solve. But the issue is that if you have a cyber criminal group, and Stefan was referring to that, I mean, if you have a crime that takes place in Ghana, but it originates from country X, the proceeds go to country Y, you're going to have to work through a number of issues before you can, even trace how things have transpired there. The third element is the rewards are very attractive. Either you talk about, targeted attacks on critical infrastructure where the ransom demands are very high, and those are the ones that we celebrate the most or talk a lot about. The other aspect that is often not spoken about is this vast underbelly of cybercrime that affects common individuals. So, growing up in India, when telcos were coming in, we often used to have a comparison of revenue models. So the gameplay in Europe was more about limited number of users, very high ARPU, average revenue per user, so it's a big ticket size. In some of the larger markets, you have a very small ticket size, but a huge population, which means that the size is huge. So if we are thinking about common individuals and putting that analogy to cybercrime as a whole, the proceeds that are going off common individuals are indeed very, very high and significant, and often not reported. The other interesting aspect over here is that cyber criminals, they operate as a business. They collaborate. But now if we flip it over to the good guys, after understanding how the odds are stacked against us, we see that there is a lot of room for us to do better. We need to try and build partnerships that can go beyond some of the traditional regulatory or legal boundaries that are imposed on us for the most part. Public-private collaboration, and I almost feel like I'm beating a dead horse, is essential if we are able to even move forward. Now, if I take the example of what's possible, right? So at the World Economic Forum, we've incubated an initiative called the Partnership Against Cybercrime. The intent was initially to define some of the parameters under which this collaboration is possible. And Laura was talking about the private sector having the prowess, but the mandate to prosecute lying with law enforcement. So it's naturally a marriage yet to be made. So this was our very nascent attempt at trying to make that at a certain level. It's gained a lot of traction since, and last year we were proud to launch an initiative on the back of it, called the Cybercrime Atlas, which was funded by 4 organizations: Microsoft, PayPal, Santander, and Fortinet. And essentially the idea is, how can you map or build better intelligence on the modus operandi of cybercriminal actors by using open source information, which, by the way, helps us move beyond some of the initial challenges that I shared as well, which are more regulatory and legal in nature. So, last point on the value of partnerships. We can have very sophisticated mechanisms for collaboration, but I think what I find is, just by virtue of participating in these efforts, you tend to build a very strong network, and cybercrime is bound to affect pretty much each and every one in this room, and that's the bad news. The good news is that if you're collaborating with people, you have an available network to lean on, and that can be pretty pivotal in such times.
Exactly right. And I think we have to keep trying all those different innovative models, because obviously what we've been doing has been marginal at best. But if we can actually bring all the different people together and dive deep into particular topics, which it sounds like you guys are doing, I think that's a good start. I wondered if I could go back to Stefan. Do you have, I know that you were talking about how Ghana has been doing some of this work, and the CERT has been really working on this quite a bit, and you've worked with the public sector, and you've worked with the private sector, and you've worked with a number of different collaborators. Can you tell me a little bit about what that looked like, and what do you think were some of the critical components of that work?
of people we've worked with. We work with organizations like UNICEF, especially in the area of children. They've been instrumental in our child online protection initiatives in terms of how we've developed a framework for protecting children. And it's not something we could have done by ourselves. So that's the value we see in such partnerships. If you look at it locally as well, we have people like the Media Foundation for West Africa that looks into, they have interest in specific areas, that how we deal with the media in terms of our work, how child online protection, they also do stuff around that. And they've been keen to work with us, we've been keen to work with them. And so all that feeds into our success as an authority. So definitely we see value in working with anyone, private sector especially.
You were talking about kind of the high school challenge and the POC work that you had been doing before. I'd imagine that takes a huge amount of collaboration amongst the local population, the high schools, the colleges. I'm sure that has been a very interesting kind of model as well.
Yes, indeed. So if you look at this, the cyber challenge, it's involved working with on the government side, of course, the education service, but then you definitely need to work with the schools themselves. You need to work with their administration, PTAs, to get that going. The sponsorships that you need to actually run that. That idea was run for the first time last year, and we did just about, if I'm correct, just about 3 schools. But then this year we shot it up to 50.
Wow.
And it went countrywide. So who is going to move the team from the north to the south? It's partnership with private companies. Who is going to give them prizes? It's
private sector.
Private support. So it's worked very well. And the good thing is this year, the final is tomorrow. So I think at some stage, they'll actually be here for the award. So you can look out for them. It's great. POC work, because of the info we get, to actually investigate crime, sometimes you actually need info from out there, right? So I can think back to around July, where we managed to make inroads in a specific issue we're facing. So late last year into this year, we started seeing, there's a group, from what we found out, it actually started in Asia, but these guys would develop an app and say they're offering you small loans. Then what would then happen is once you subscribe, they take a lot of personal information, your photograph, your national ID, even in the fine print, they have you permit them to take your contacts on your phone. So you take this loan thinking, well, it's 200 cedis, I have 3 months to pay. But then 2 weeks later, they call you and tell you, hey, you owe us 50, 60, 70% markup on that loan you've taken. If you don't pay us, we'll broadcast your photo to your contacts and tell them you're a criminal, you're a thief. And we're actually doing this, and the complaints started climbing. We started investigations, but then what was the key was getting a call from someone in the public and said, hey, I've seen some guys sitting in this building. I'm not sure what they're doing. We went there and it turned out to be that's where the syndicate was sitting. We arrested over 400 people that were actually running this scam. So that's a good example of how partnerships like this can help us as an authority.
Yeah, and that trust is so hard to build, but you did that, and look at what came out as a result. That's fantastic. What a great local example. I wanted to open up the stage for questions. If anybody has any questions from the audience, we'll have some time for that, and then we'll come back, and I'd love to have one last remark from everybody, and then I'll just close out the session. But if anybody has any questions, please feel free. Please go ahead. Yeah, do you want to? Oh, she's got it.
So, if yes, how can we create a retention or reinsertion model for cybersecurity criminals in order to use their skill set into an ethical way of doing cybersecurity? Okay, I'm asking, is it possible, do you think that it's possible to create a model, a reinsertion model for cybersecurity criminals in a way of using the skill set into an ethical way of doing cybersecurity. I'm taking an example of one young guy who is really skilled, but it turned into black hacking, right? Mm-hmm. And it maybe hack the agency bank in Ghana. Do you think it's possible to reinsert him into the society in order to use his skill set in the ethical way of doing the cybersecurity?
Look, I don't have a qualified answer on whether there are approaches at scale. There will always be that odd person who can flip over, but I don't know if at a systemic level we have mechanisms by means of which we can convert cyber criminals to the right side. Having said that, I think there is a massive opportunity here, and it's important to investigate what is the reason that the person flipped over to the dark side, if you were to call it, in the first instance. And to me, it comes down to a lack of awareness about how these skills can be channeled in the right way in the first instance, right? So if we're thinking about overall awareness of cybersecurity as a career profession, it is extremely low. And not just in entry-level folks, even in people with significant amount of experience. Anecdotally speaking, I went back to my business school the other day, and I asked a class of about 150-odd MBAs that, have you considered a career in cybersecurity? They were like, no. I was like, what are your reasons for not doing that? They're like, it's a technical profession or something, right? I think the issue is that people don't even understand what are the pathways. So now if I take it back to your point about that person who did not have the awareness of what those options could be, if we were to do it differently, build awareness right from the word go, and then people are able to opt for this as a lucrative career option, as opposed to be an avenue to sort of approach from the dark side and then eventually, make money, which is more for the short term and not sustainable. So I don't know if I answer your question fully, but these are just some reflections.
Should I go first? Okay. Yeah, I think the other thing to consider is what is their motivation in wanting to flip to the good side? Because it could also be a long con. It's much easier to frame a person's perception of cyber right at the onset, in their infancy. That's why capacity building and awareness on cyber and career paths available is important at the start, rather than trying to flip them much later on. If I've been a criminal before, the chances that my network will reach out to me even 4 years later is very high. So it would be a big risk to take. And from where I'm standing from, that is a person that I'd want to monitor closely. Regardless. So, but I'll let our specialist here speak. Ling, I don't want to steal your thunder.
Oh, no, it's interesting to hear various perspectives, but I think the information that I'm going to offer now I'm not sure whether it will also entirely address your question, but I would like to bring up that, over in the global law enforcement community, cyber offender prevention is a topic that is currently gaining more and more prominence. In fact, there is a project that is being funded by the European Commission. It's called the Interpol Network, International Cyber Offender Prevention Network. The project lead is the Dutch police, and currently this project comprises about 26 countries, if I remember correctly. So what it aims to do is to, bring together law enforcement agencies and even related partners like in the private sector or in academia or even non-profit organizations to devise and implement various cyber offender prevention strategies. So just to share a few things of initiatives that are currently being done, I'm aware that, the Dutch police, they have launched various campaigns to inform the youths about how certain forms of behavior like DDoS attacks or using remote access Trojans might be illegal, because some of these youths, they are extremely talented, but they may not be aware that certain behaviors are considered unlawful or even cybercrime. So I know that the Dutch police have also brought in various law enforcement agencies to partner with Google to run a AdWords campaign, I think some time ago, in the sense that, certain would-be criminals, if they were to conduct searches on search engines like Google, instead of getting the information that they want on, how to write malicious codes or where can I buy malware that I can use, instead they get like a public service message to remind them, certain of these behaviors are considered as crime and to get them to reconsider their actions. Other initiatives are like, various educational games that enforce cyber norms and cyber safety. They also run things like, boot camps that they develop in cooperation with public sector and private sector partners to, hone their skills, but at the same time make use of the opportunity to highlight, positive messages on how their skills and talents should be used in the right way instead of in the wrong way. So I'm not sure whether that actually answers your question, but I think over at law enforcement, we are tackling, turning people from the dark side to the right side by targeting it at the cyber offender prevention angle.
That's fantastic. I knew somebody on this panel would have a really good answer to that. I'm being told that there's only 5 minutes left. Okay, so I thought there were 15 minutes, so apologies, no more questions. But if you each want to give just one final takeaway, and then I'll give my takeaway and we can wrap up. Stefan, do you want to start us off?
Sure. I think from the Ghana experience, what would always emphasize around collaboration, the fact that cybersecurity is not something you can do alone and be effective at it. Even within your own borders, if one agency cannot do the entire work, you need to work with other agencies that also touch the space. So in our case, we use what we call the Joint Cybersecurity Committee, which is actually a group of about 18 organizations across the government, from military to banking sector, the central bank, telecoms. All these people are together in one place, and therefore developing policy for Ghana is done collaboratively, and that makes it easier to enforce. But then you need to, like we said earlier, you need to build that up to the international level, and therefore collaboration for us is fundamental for us to be effective at this game called cybersecurity.
Thank you. Go ahead.
I think there's no doubt that when we talk about, how we deal with cyber threats, how we overcome cyber threats, partnership is very important. I think that's a very well-recognized fact. So I think partnerships at the national level is important. I think earlier Stefan has pointed out the importance of, maybe getting the CERT community and the law enforcement community to work together, at least at the operational level. So within country, partnership is important. Among countries, partnerships are also important because, countries within the same region may face certain similar crime concerns. They may have information that they can share with each other. They may have expertise or capabilities that can contribute to the tackling of these threats for the benefit of the whole region. So even across sectors, such collaboration and partnerships will be important in the form of, information sharing. I think the Cybercrime Atlas initiative is a very good one, a good example of how data generated by the private sector could possibly benefit the law enforcement community, the CERT community, where, the actual action against these cyber threat actors can be taken. So partnership needs to be multi-sector, multinational.
Thank you. I was going to talk about partnerships, but since that's been spoken, I'll flip to something else. So, there's a known saying which says, the more you sweat in peace, the less you bleed in war. Now, it's a bit of an extreme analogy, but at the same time, if we think about cyber attacks as more of an intent of, war on an organization as a whole by cyber criminals or otherwise, it's essentially preparation and the steps that we put towards preparing for it that can be the game changer between the organizations that are resilient and those that are not. Because eventually, you know, I mean, I think the conversation has squarely shifted towards resilience and acknowledgement of the fact that attacks are here to stay. And the more we prepare, the more we invest in partnerships, the more we set up the foundations within our respective organizations for measures that make our organizations resilient, the more we'll be able to succeed when incidents actually affect us.
Yeah, and I'm the last one to speak. I don't need two microphones. Thank you. Everything I want you to say has been said, but I'm going to comment on something interesting that Akshay shared. He's talked about the collaboration among criminals, and I can comment that I find it very admirable. They collaborate very well, they share information. When there's a new exploit, the pace at which that information is going to spread is just different. It's out of this world. If we picked up that habit of sharing information at a faster pace, including information on how we've been hit and attacked without fear of consequences or reputational risk, I think it would take us to a better place. And then over and above that, when we look at the topic of new tech, the pace at which technological innovations is happening is increasing exponentially. We must remain cognizant of the current cybersecurity skills gap that exists globally. That skills gap is also there when it comes to emerging tech, whether it's blockchain, crypto, or quantum computing. Now, when you amalgamate all that together in cybersecurity, it's a different animal altogether. So we must therefore be very intentional about ensuring that we continue to educate ourselves and those around us, just like the criminals are working hard at educating others to support them in their criminal networks. We cannot be left behind. And this is a kind of thing where right now, here are the criminals, here we are. But over time, the divide is going to become so much bigger, and we must be cognizant that the rewards, unfortunately, for cybercrime seem to come in at a very fast pace and in huge amounts. So what are we putting in place to encourage people to do the right thing right from a tender age? It's not a conversation to have at varsity level. It's a conversation to have right at birth. Thanks.
And with that, I think I'll close it out. I had a few closing remarks, but I think that they've all answered all of these pieces very, very well and put a nice conclusion to it. I really thank you all for coming to this panel. I think it's really a super interesting piece in this space. The cybercrime, but also the future tech, I think is a very, very interesting space. They've all taken very key aspects: collaboration, partnerships, innovative models, real basic capacity building, and workforce development, really thinking about getting folks at the very, very ground level. And I would just encourage folks to think about the fact that I don't know if future tech totally changes the market. Even though it's exciting, even though it's super scary, if we can really focus on just investing in the basic building blocks, the basic cyber management, basic cyber hygiene, I think a lot of these pieces will be addressed. So if we can keep the focus on that space, I think we would be doing very well. Thank you all for coming.